Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. Today's episode was a long time in the making, and it is about a topic that I feel is pivotal, that I know is pivotal to our work as speech and language pathologists: trauma-informed care. Rachel Archambault, also known as a PTSD SLP, survived a shooting in the school that she was working at as a first-year SLP. 8 years later, she's speaking around the country in different schools, especially in her state of Florida, to educate people about how critical being trauma-informed is, knowing how to prevent trauma from happening to our students, and making sure that we can be there as a safe space for the individuals that we are working with so that they can fulfill their communication potential. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. Today, we have a truly important guest on a topic that I find to be one of the most important topics in speech and language therapy, which is being trauma-informed. I have waited a long time to get this individual on this podcast. I have sent many messages on LinkedIn. I've sent mail. I don't know. I use snail mail. I didn't resort to that. But I many messages through email on LinkedIn, and Rachel has been so kind to share her time with me tonight after many messages back and forth, because I knew that I needed her on this podcast, especially in the beginning of this new year, to help us all understand what it means to be trauma-informed and how crucial it is when we work with any individual of any age, especially if they're neurodivergent, as this podcast speaks to that population who have experienced a lot of trauma. So I want to welcome Rachel to the podcast. So Rachel, and I want to pronounce your name correctly, Archambault. Rachel Archambault is here from sunny Florida while we're enduring a cold winter up here up north. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy we were able to plan this, and early in the year.
Yes, perfect timing for it. Just getting the year off right, making sure everybody knows exactly why this is so important. And I know that you are not just trauma-informed because you've learned how to be trauma-informed. You also are a living experience to trauma, to a very specific and national trauma that occurred in the United States of America. If you could go back in time and think about that moment, because you're not just a trauma-informed expert, but you're also training everybody else, it seems like, on how to get trauma-informed. If you could go back in time in terms of your professional and your personal journey into becoming what now is the PTSD SLP, which is helping so many people just in general on Instagram and all over. Can you take us through what led you to becoming this leading voice in trauma-informed education?
Thank you so much for that introduction. I never thought I would be speaking on this topic, I guess, especially going to school, undergrad, grad school for speech pathology. This was never anything that was taught to us. It wasn't a phrase that came up. So like you mentioned, I experienced a nationally viewed traumatic experience. I worked at a school called Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, my second year as an SLP. And I want to assure all of you listening, I don't talk about like the ins and outs of what's going on or what happened that day, just because I know that you'll tune out. Like, you don't know what's coming. So in order to be trauma informed, I don't need to talk about like the ins and outs of that day. And if I do, it's very like trauma informed way I speak about it. But after experiencing this trauma myself, my students, my community, my workplace, I did not care about speech pathology, and my students didn't. Like, we had to go back to the scene of the crime every single day. So I was trying to figure out how to work with traumatized students as well as myself. And I Googled and I found the phrase trauma-informed care. And through finding that phrase, I realized that it was something that should have been taught to us before a situation like that happened. It's my personal belief that everyone should be trauma-informed. What happened at our school then required trauma sensitive or trauma specific services. We really needed trauma informed before to know how to work with students who have been traumatized. But then on top of that, we also needed specific and trauma sensitive on top of that. So there's higher levels of trauma response from us as providers, but trauma informed is what every SLP, every parent should be off the bat. And trauma informed care is, in my opinion, preventative. That's what brought me to here, I guess.
Yes, that brought you to here to where you are and also to this
Hmm.
podcast both.
Yes, yes.
But Rachel, you touched on a couple of things that I wanted to dig a little deeper in, which is you mentioned how you're not going to go into the details of what happened because at a certain point we'll just tune out. We're not going to listen to the ins and outs of it, and you want to speak about what happened in a trauma informed way when you do. And I think that is kind of like the first step and the first opening of this podcast, which is that when we speak to people who have been through something, especially a lot of our neurodivergent teens and tweens or children, whoever we're working with as SLPs, I think that that could be really useful to think about. That yes, we can hear them out, but we shouldn't be pushing. And I remember I went to a mental health training back in the day in the New York City Department of Education, which is we're not asking specific questions about what happened to that person in that specific trauma. We're just saying, are you okay?
Hmm.
Very general statements. Are you okay? What can I do to help? Um, Not offering false promises that things are going to get better. So you're bringing me back to that. So that seems like that's kind of the first step of all of it is understanding how we're going to be speaking about someone who shares trauma with us.
That's a huge part of it. But also, I like to think of trauma informed care being preventative as if you are sitting in front of a room of 50 people, whether they are children or adults, we don't know what trauma they've experienced. We can't assume that they have not experienced trauma. So it is much easier to think that people in this room possibly have experienced trauma. How can I make sure I don't cause additional harm? That is trauma informed care. And there's really like three parts, three R's of trauma informed care is realizing the prevalence of trauma, recognizing how trauma affects all individuals involved with the program, organization, system, and workforce, and then responding by putting this knowledge into practice. The fourth R of that is also known as like resisting re-traumatization. So I say that's a big part of an SLP's job. We are trying to prevent additional harm in any possible way. And some of you might be thinking like, I've never caused harm. I never will. But really, I would like the mindset to be, I probably have caused harm in some way across the career that I've had, rather than saying I've never caused harm, because you're probably missing something and you're not making the changes or having the mindset of being a informed person that you might be causing harm. And how can we prevent doing that in the future?
I think that's so interesting. I never thought about it like that in terms of thinking I have caused harm. There's no
Hmm.
way that in all my years, and I've been in this field for almost 15 years. Oh my gosh. Okay. I feel old. But like, but there's, of course, along the way, I've made mistakes. We weren't trained in trauma informed care in graduate school. And then I was thrown into a school. And then it started happening where I would see these. I was in a program with neurodivergent teens and tweens, and adolescent years are tough to begin with. And we don't know what's going on that led up to that. But then in addition, there was this extra layer of them feeling other from the past. And it didn't really get on my radar, I guess, until I started noticing certain behaviors that I thought were, oh, they were just acting out. I don't know what's going on. Why are they acting out like this? And then as I peeled back layers and spoke to parents and got maybe more people to open up, I started thinking, hey, how am I working on social with an individual? Social pragmatic communication, as it's called. How am I working on speech and language?
Hmm.
Communication is the basis of all of this without thinking about, wait a second, this person went through all these difficult things, and now I'm expecting them to socialize in a group, communicate their needs, all while maybe possibly being re traumatized.
Absolutely. And I like to think of it, I mean, we have this outside world that we can consider. How can we not cause harm in that? But also, in terms of our speech pathology. So I consider myself a high school level SLP. That is my favorite age group to work with.
I love that. Middle and high school, the best.
Yes, no, I love it, but it's also where we have to be very careful because we could be causing harm. And it's, I think people can dismiss and they hear the word trauma so much and they're like, that doesn't count. It's not our job to decide what counts for another. So in the high school system, if I'm calling a teacher, I make sure to say the room number. Hey, can you send Johnny to room 726? That way, hopefully, that teacher is not saying, Johnny, go to speech in front of the entire classroom,
Yes.
because I don't know how he feels about speech. And it is not my job to tell him, you shouldn't be embarrassed about speech. It's this. Like, we need them to have the buy in. We need that student to be able to say, I feel safe with Miss A. I feel safe disclosing this to people. We want to make it, especially at the older ages, as confidential as possible. And when we take it upon ourselves to say, it's not embarrassing, don't worry about it, I'm not going to fix that because this is the way I call the teachers for everyone, maybe you can switch it for everyone and do that same thing. So those are little ways that we are actually causing harm. So it doesn't need to be this big harm that everyone is thinking, oh my gosh, I've never caused harm before. It's those little things that maybe 20 years from now, you're going to see one of your students and they're going to say, I was not coming to you because I was embarrassed of my stutter. I didn't want to be taken out. Some kids were making fun of me for it. And you're going to find out little things like that. So I don't mean harm in this big way. It's little things that end up adding up to a lot of things and potentially can cause trauma, especially to that person. Again, it's not our job to decide what is trauma for another person. It's their experience.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that because, again, you experienced what I would label a large trauma, a traumatic
Hmm.
event, so to say.
Hmm.
You were in a traumatic event. And I think that sometimes it can be confusing to some of us that a traumatic event that seems large and widespread is also equivalent in the sense that it's under the category of trauma, even with a small embarrassment. So let's say you embarrass somebody and that causes trauma to them, that's still under the same umbrella of trauma. It's just
Right.
different. And
Right.
I think that's very important to think about because
Yes.
moment can cause trauma, even if it's not this large scale traumatic event.
Definitely. And I think what you're trying, so there's a theory in the trauma world called big T and little t trauma. So what I went through is generally by 99% of people considered a big T trauma, which can result in PTSD. It's basically considered something that threatens your life at some point. But what happens if your body, especially for these neurodivergent individuals that we're treating, they're dysregulated? If they
Yes.
feel bullying is something that also can feel life threatening. So I don't necessarily subscribe to the big T and little t, because some things can be a big T for some people and can be little t for other people. An example I give for that is the word divorce. Divorce can be a big T for someone. It can also be a little t for someone. It can also have many effects with the generations involved with it. Is it the parents, the two of them we're talking about, or the children underneath? So it's very easy for us as humans to want to try to categorize how bad something is so we can understand, or use our own experiences of things and say, oh, well, that's not bad. I went through that also. We just have to say, this is what's happening in our brains and our bodies, and it's producing some stress, which can contribute to trauma. So we don't need to necessarily categorize it on how bad something is. Also, we don't know what our kids are walking in with. We don't know what they've experienced all the time. Sometimes we hear little things, but you're going to have a lot of students that you are working with that you don't know what their history is. And we can't just say, oh, this kid is this age, they've probably never experienced anything traumatic. That's not what the research shows.
Yeah. So it could have any age. It could be any sort of level trauma. Like you said, the big T, little t. That's really a really good explanation of it because, like you said, in your situation, 99% of people will consider it a big T. But then there are some things where it's just basically people feel things in different ways. And for some, some people, it would be a big T, just because of just chronic stress from being dysregulated. That could be a big T,
Exactly.
and for other people, it might be a little T, and then that can lead to PTSD. And so, where do you think? I mean, you've explained a couple of points in terms of where people are getting it wrong and how we can fix that. But where do you think people are getting it wrong when it comes, especially to our neurodivergent teens and tweens who are already dysregulated, who are already feeling misunderstood, trying to find their identity, or any teen and tween, really, or child? It could be anybody. I mean, for the purposes of this podcast, I really just want people to be trauma informed. Um, and when they're approaching these individuals in speech and language therapy, when they're starting to work on the goals, you get that individualized education plan, you start working on the goals. Is it like, do you feel like people need to do something in the beginning when they start to get to know somebody, that maybe they're not doing, or that we're not doing as a collective SLP community, that is something that could be a preventative measure from the beginning of time, from when we meet these individuals that we're working with?
So I think this can be best answered by going over what the pillars of trauma informed care are. This is from SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Association. When you Google the pillars of trauma informed care, there's anywhere from like 3 to 12, but I go by SAMHSA's specifically, which are safety, choice, collaboration and mutuality, trust and transparency, empowerment, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. So the biggest thing that I can offer to people right off the bat is reflect on all of these. Where are you providing this in your session? And definitely with a new person, a new student, we want to ask ourselves, where can we provide this child more safety? Is their safety the same definition of as mine? Or yours kind of doesn't matter in this moment? Or like, I want you to understand that their definition of safety might be different than yours. And you saying, oh, I'm safe, this room is safe. It doesn't matter that you're telling them that. They have to feel it. They have to have the
Yeah.
buy-in for it. And you can do that by providing the other pillars of trauma informed care. So that's adding choice, adding collaboration and mutuality, instead of you just being this power person, especially with students who are neurodivergent. They want to have a say so in what they're doing. They might ask a lot of questions about, why am I here? What are we doing? And instead of just saying, don't worry about it, you've been here 50 times, like maybe prepare something for that about, hey, let's collaborate. What goals would you like to work on while you're here? I think by reflecting on these pillars, that is the first thing that you can do with a client. Maybe you're not connecting with them as easily as you might with other students. Ask yourself, where can I provide this student more safety? And maybe you can even ask them, what would make you feel safer in this room? I know one thing, working with the population of the students that I know that went through a traumatic event, a lot of them did not like having their back to the door. So I moved my desk so that we were both kind of, our sides were at the door. So we both had that the ability to look. And even if they want to have the ability to look and my back is towards the door, that was something that made them feel safer, just by talking to a lot of them, that when they're telling me they're in this classroom and they're in the very back of the room and their back is towards the door, that doesn't make them feel safe and they're not allowed to turn around. I go, oh, that's an easy fix. Let's move these desks around. So listen to what they have to say. Safety, choice, collaboration, mutuality, trust and transparency, empowerment, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. Reflect on that. The second thing that I would recommend is reflecting on your own stressors, your dysregulation. That is such a big one when I visit these classrooms, and we have very stressful jobs. We have
Mhm.
stressful jobs. We have kids that also like bring out the stress in us. But I talk to these adults and they have no idea what things stress them out. They're just at the end of the day so tight. Their jaws are clenched. Their tone is monotone. They're very short with things. And I can see that they're stressed, yet they have no idea that they're stressed or what stressed them out. So I always recommend reflecting on your stressors, from the very easiest being like, do you know what stresses you out? Is it loud noises? Is it just noise in general? Is it someone not listening to you? And some of the kids are not going to listen to us, right? So that's going to amp us up. That's going to dysregulate us. Do you know what you look like when you're stressed? Are you able to identify when you're stressed? How do you regulate yourself? Do you have any coping strategies? Or do you just be stressed all day? Is your dysregulation negatively impacting a client? Is it negatively impacting a session? And then finally, are you causing harm? Because at the end of the day, if you are sitting in this dysregulated space and telling a client that they have to remain regulated, you can't do that. A dysregulated person cannot regulate another dysregulated person. So
Yeah.
we have to be very mindful of what our bodies and brains are telling us and have coping strategies so that we can do our jobs.
Yeah, thank you. That was a lot, but a lot of really
A lot.
critical
Yes.
information.
Yes.
I'm digesting it as we speak, but you did mention a dysregulated adult can't really regulate anybody, any child. And I remember having the sensory SLP on here who works a lot on sensory regulation, Jessie Ginsburg, and she had mentioned the greatest gift that we can really give to any child is a regulated adult. And so I like that you mentioned that we have to check in with ourselves first and make sure that we're regulated because it's true. Sometimes we don't know what's causing us to be stressed. And then the other individual, it's like contagious. The person we're working with is going to get our anxiety, get our stress, feel it, and everything. And then you also mentioned something about the safe space to create to make sure that you can accommodate the needs of the individual. But the story that you explained, where the individual or multiple individuals said that they didn't feel safe when their chair was to the back of the door or
Mhm.
their back of the chair
Mhm.
was to the door, facing the door, right? They were able to articulate that to you. They felt safe explaining that to you. And then you were able to accommodate that. How did you get to that place with that individual for those listening who maybe feel like people aren't advocating for themselves or they don't feel comfortable advocating? How did you form this relationship where they felt comfortable expressing something like that or anything like that in general that they need that
I
accommodation?
think I mean, some of these students I had for a few years and we already had good relationships, but I think number one, trauma bonding of going through the same thing together. Like I understood and I was able to, maybe they weren't able to articulate it, but I know how I felt. That's not gonna be all of you listening, the case that you have, but you
Right.
can also ask these questions or try out different things. If you see dysregulation of one of your students, whether that's them like zoning out or bouncing their legs or walking around the room, you don't need to say, "Hey, we're sitting right now." No, maybe you guys can go for a walk and show safety that way, but trauma informed care is based off of building relationships. So that is going to be more challenging with some students that the relationship building isn't there. But that's why I always refer to the 6 pillars of where can I add safety here? Where can I add choice? So maybe safety is a hard one for you of like, what makes this student feel safe? I don't know yet. But you can do that by adding choices. You can do that by adding trust. So little things like trust. So here's an example for speech that is missed all the time. So let's say you're working with elementary school. They're not necessarily sure how to count to 100 yet, but you want to work on some articulation drills. And the kid gets bored after 3 of them, and secretly in your head, you want to do 100 drills. And the kid goes, "Miss A, how many more do we have to do?" And you say, "Don't worry about it, just like 4 more." But then you go on for 93 more. So that kid may not be able to count, but they know that you lied.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's
You broke the trust.
exactly, you broke trust there. So it doesn't have to be this big trust of like telling your deepest, darkest secrets to someone. It's little things of, she didn't tell me the truth.
Hmm.
I don't think that was 4, but it definitely was a lot. So just from little things like that, be as transparent as possible. Explain things as much as possible. So if safety is a hard one that you don't know, I mean, that could be ensuring physical and emotional safety. Maybe your students want to talk about things to you. Listen to them. Don't just shut them down. Confidentiality is respected for choice. Try to give them as much control as possible. The trick that a lot of us were taught in grad school was like, have a few ideas, like let's say 10
Yeah.
ideas for your sessions, right? And you're going to say, "All right, which activities, I've got a bunch here. Which ones do you want to do?" So you have a bunch prepared, but they're all of your making, but you're giving them more choice in what they would like to participate in. So that adds to the buy-in and ultimately adds to the trust. So safety, I'm not talking about safety necessarily with the backs to the doors, or try to think of what other things in that room might make them feel unsafe. You can ask them questions about it. You can also collaborate with the parents if you'd like to, if you're working in a private practice or anything. Like, what makes this kid feel safest? Is it like sitting on the floor? Do they like to go for a walk? What things can we do to give this child more choice and safety and trust and transparency?
Yeah, and elementary school is so different than middle school and high school. I recently started working in an elementary school as well as the middle school and high school, so I'm like shifted between
Wow.
3. And so, yeah, it's quite the change, and I can say that I'm actually learning how to work with them in terms of giving them a lot of options, always giving them a lot of choices, just like I did with my middle school and high school students, but even like
Mhm.
more options and trying to think about, hey, like, because they can't yet maybe speak up for themselves, especially if they're having communication difficulties when they're so much younger. So I feel like I keep trying to think about what are they really interested in? They're not really telling me what they really want. They're saying they like certain things, but I could tell that they're getting really bored or fidgety or something's like distressing them. And they can't, some of them just don't have the words yet, literally, just quite literally don't have the words yet to say
Right.
anything. So it's kind of just us reading the room, reading the faces and things like that. But also going back to what you said about the power dynamic. This is a big one for me because this is something that I feel like when I communicate with adults, just in general, across the spectrum of different professionals, a lot of times I'll hear something like, okay, we don't want to be their friend. Our goal isn't to be their friend. Our goal is to be their teacher. And I hear this a lot. And on the flip side, I think to myself, okay, but how can we work with anybody if they don't view us as a collaborator? I don't know if you've been down that road too, where other professionals feel like, hey, we're not their friend, we're their authority figure, we're their teacher, we're their speech pathologist, we're not their friend. How would you
Okay.
respond to that?
I have a lot of feelings about that. So, I mean, I have read due to this job, I read parenting books. I don't have children, but I read parenting books to make me a better SLP. And I consider myself a gentle SLP, which, if you know the gentle parenting space, that the word actually is authoritative parenting. So I consider myself an authoritative SLP, that I'm not authoritarian, which is that power dynamic that a lot of those people who say that phrase, I'm not your friend, I'm this above you. If you're already in that mindset, you're not going to get that collaboration piece. You can't collaborate from that power dynamic. So I don't consider myself a friend of theirs. Don't we're not friends with children, but I am an authoritative person that they know that I have the authority, but I can also sit shoulder to shoulder with them and say, what would you like to work on? Here are the things that I planned. I think that's a really important mindset shift of just like you can still be an authoritative person, but not be permissive. I think a lot of people have that confusion, especially in the parenting space, that they think if you're not authoritarian, you're permissive. And there's so many things in between there. We absolutely can have control of the room. I've never had any issues with my classroom management skills. Partly because I work on the relationships a lot. The students come to me. I actually had, in my current role, I'm a speech language program specialist. I have 45 schools. One
Oh,
of the
wow.
schools that I went to support my SLP, other other generations that she was working with were unhappy with the cool kids room that she was providing. It was such a safe space that the kids would not leave in the high schools. Like, and the other teachers have a problem with that. They're like, well, they don't want to come to me. Well, that's a different issue. We're not, it's one or the other. They feel safe there and they don't feel safe with you. How can you make them feel more safe so that maybe they want to split their time? It's not just, oh, they're doing nothing there. It's a safe space there. They're able to talk to their friends. And I told this person, what an amazing accomplishment that this SLP has made the speech room the cool kids room or a safe space to be in a high school setting. That is such a win versus I don't want anyone to know I'm in speech. They're bringing their friends. They're bringing their gen ed friends.
One to
That's an
one.
accomplishment. So I reframed it as that is a win. That's what should be celebrated, you know?
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned that because, yes, there is resistance to speech, especially kids get older and they feel embarrassed and they don't really understand quite why they've been in speech for so long. And to be honest, in some cases, maybe they don't need speech anymore, right? And we have to really look at
Yes,
that
yes.
too, instead of just saying, oh, we're going to work until you complete your goals. Well, let's think about what is distressing you, why you don't want to be here. There could be a multitude of reasons. But then on the flip side, like you mentioned, the cool kids room, I've also seen environments where, like, for example, I've worked in environments where individuals are of a low socioeconomic background and there's intergenerational poverty, so there's another layer of trauma there, and many individuals actually wanted to come to the speech room because they felt like it was a break from the classroom, and they felt like in that room they could be saved, they could be feel more calm, more regulated. And to me it sends a message that, hey, they want to be there maybe because there's too much activity going on in the classroom that's triggering them, and that's making them feel maybe just uncomfortable, and maybe they're overstimulated at home too. And so maybe it's re resetting the trauma or resetting things that are already happening. So I guess it could work either way, right?
Right, right. And another example that just came to me of like I've worked with these authoritarian, SLPs, and one situation that I had is I walked into a room and there was a big whiteboard and there was in dry erase board no slang words. Like that was written on there. And I took that opportunity to like explain through a trauma informed lens, like, does that make them feel safe there? Like that this is their generation. This is how
Right,
they
right.
communicate. We're about
We use
communicating, right?
slang. Yeah.
Right, right. We want them to communicate. So why not collaborate with them instead of saying no this? Like what's the reason behind that? And I tried to get to the actual reason and they really couldn't come up with one. So I said, let's collaborate instead. So I actually had big post-it in my room that I said teach Miss A slang. So they would come in and they'd be like, Miss A, do you know bet? Do you know this one? Like they would give me certain words. And even if I knew the word, I'd be like, no, put it on the board. Like, let's collaborate together. So they view it as like a piece of their art, kind of. They would draw on it and like explain what it meant. It's also figurative language, right? So we're working on that instead of we're using it as an opportunity for communication. We're collaborating, we're fostering trust, we're fostering a safe environment versus saying, no, you can't do that. Does that make someone feel safe in that room? No.
Yeah, so that's the whole thing. And this is something I grapple with, and I'm sure many people listening as professionals grapple with. And for those neurodivergent teens and tweens or young adults listening in, maybe they can also, write in afterwards. But one thing I grapple with, and perhaps you can help me with this, and I'm sure other SLPs can relate, or teachers, anybody in the education sphere, is that I want to make sure that there is a level of autonomy for my students. And then I observe other SLPs using timers, for example. This is one thing that I get sometimes uncomfortable with, and I use it sometimes too. So that's an example of something where it's like, okay, we're going to do this for 5 minutes, and then we're going to do this for 5 minutes, and we're going to do this for 5 minutes. And I understand that a structure is important in a session, right? Where you want to go through different things. But I also know that things can change up based on how people are feeling throughout the session, right? So it's not necessarily going to be 5 minutes. And then once you delay the 5 minutes and it goes into 10 minutes and it goes into 15 minutes, well, then is that an example of breaking trust? And then also, when individuals are trying to keep it structured, another example that I also grapple with that I see, because also I took a couple of years away from my clinical role, so now I'm seeing things from an even fresher lens, is
Right.
the use of, okay, you chose that, that's great. And then it's like a structured worksheet, for example. And let's work on the structured worksheet, but then there's no room for any sort of autonomy. So I'm just curious what you think of these structured worksheets, these timers, in terms of also balancing that with autonomy, balancing that with professionalism, because you want to work on certain goals.
I think it's hard. So I think the definition that I read out of the trauma informed in the beginning is like recognizing the systems in place. So for many of us in the school system, again, I'm in Florida, there's no caseload cap here. So if I have a group of 7 kids sitting in front of me, I probably, for my own benefit, need something structured so I can take 7 data pieces. So in grad school, when I think we're taught how to take the data, and then it comes more through experience of let's do more child-led. And I think that that is becoming a bigger part of speech right now, which I'm glad to see that they're taking the students for what they would like to do. That doesn't work for everyone. Some people need structure. Some of our students with autism like structure. They like to
Yeah.
know first we do this, then we do this, then we do this. I think for those students who need structure, I think that's important. I think for the students who don't require structure like that, and I have something I didn't say, I had both ADHD and PTSD now acquired. So with that, there's two forces kind of like fighting each other. I don't like
Yeah.
routine, but I sometimes like routine. I'm kind of like all over the place.
Right. I relate. Yeah, to that.
Right. So I'm looking at some of my students that have ADHD or that are neurodivergent, and I see what their strengths are. Like, do they need some sort of, maybe I can, if I have a 30-minute session, maybe I have a general idea of what I'm going to do in 5-minute increments, or a 5-minute intro, a 10-minute whatever, and a 10-minute wrap up. Like, that's how I kind of structure it. That's it. That's my structure. So in the first 5 minutes, that is always my transition time. When the students walk through my door, I say, do you need 2 minutes to like sit in the calm corner? Do you need to charge your phone, or would you like to get started now? Some kids are like, I want to get out of here as soon as possible. I'm going to sit right now. They don't want the transition time, right? Some of my other students who are neurodivergent or who just have a rough day, like it's 90 minutes back to back to back in the high school setting, they
Yeah.
need just to like calm their brain down, and then they take a big breath and they're like, all right, I'm ready, let's go. So I think that we have to be very flexible with people, like treat them as people. What would you like to do? The timers for me don't work all the time. I don't tend to use them except for certain students that thrive off routine. But that is something that I understand from building relationships with my clients, with my students. And I'm like, this kid loves a timer. We're going to use a timer. That's, we've got the structure in there. But for most kids, I think with their entire days, especially in the school system, so structured, it's really important to have that unstructured time within a structured time.
Yeah. Oh, I think did I lose you?
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, okay, okay. No, you just faded out for a second. No, but yeah, I thank you for explaining that because it's something that I actually have been thinking about. So it's helping me also, so selfishly, but also maybe can help other people think about structure and unstructured. You could still be a little unstructured and be flexible and pivot within something that's structured. I find myself sometimes surrounded, not just like where I work, but in general, just over the course of so many years of being an SLP, I found myself around many people that were very routine oriented in general. I'm kind of like that type B SLP that
Me
is
too.
more right. So I related to you on that. That can, be all over the place, undiagnosed ADHD, whatever it may be. But I think that you had said something earlier about sometimes we project. You didn't say the word project, so I'm not going to quote you on that. But
No, no.
sometimes we put our own expectations of ourselves maybe on others in the same way as maybe we're dysregulated and then we end up putting that onto somebody else and then we need the routine, we need the structure. So could it be that some are also setting up like sessions in a way where they feel more comfortable? Is that, would you say
Yes,
that that's part of it,
absolutely.
or am I overthinking it? I don't know.
No, 100%. And that's part of like the systems in place that we are trying to cope with the large caseloads that we have. We are trying to cope with how can we make our time a little bit easier. And I think there's still ways to do that without necessarily making it first we do this, then we do this, everyone's doing the same thing. I think there's ways to do that it's not so much for the students, but you are absolutely correct that with the systems in place, we can't be as flexible as possible. I even say we cannot be 100% trauma informed unless the systems above us are 100% trauma informed. I can only be as trauma informed as the space above us. Again, those caseload caps. There's no caseload cap in Florida. My first year, I had 111 students in the school
What?
system by myself. Yes,
Wait a
that's
second.
normal.
Wait,
That's
mic drop.
normal.
Mic drop. Even though I'm not using the external mic, literally figurative language, but 111
Yes.
individuals on your caseload.
Yes.
So how does that fit into a day? Is this a 7-day work week, or you're seeing them back to
No,
back,
no, that
like,
was in the
during
schools. It's large groups. It's large groups. Some of those students were one time a week in the high school setting. That's helpful, but I had to manage that with large groups, and that was my first year in the school system. I didn't know any better. I didn't know what a regular caseload was. I was just like, I guess so. That sounds good. So,
Right.
especially in the high schools,
Oh,
it's typical to
crazy.
have like the higher numbers like that. But
Yeah.
in order to fit that amount in my week, I had to have larger groups. So that was how I helped myself, and I didn't know another way to do it. Meanwhile, probably need another 50% or full-time person to help me with that caseload. But when
Yeah.
the systems in place above us aren't trauma informed and the state doesn't have a caseload cap, that makes me less able to be trauma informed. I'm less able to get to the needs of my students if I have 111 students on my caseload.
Yeah, I think
So
people don't understand that
no,
numbers do matter, because each individual that you're seeing, you have to give a certain amount of attention to, and you want to also be trauma informed while delivering a speech and language therapy session, while collecting data, while still maintaining your clinical skills and elevating your skills, right? And all these things with each individual. And now you times that by 111, you said,
yes,
how is that humanly possible with each
that's
individual?
Florida. That's Florida, baby.
The Sunshine State, the
The
Sunshine
Sunshine
State.
State.
Oh my
Yeah, no.
goodness.
Yeah, and
Yeah, so
there's
that's what
other
happened.
states out there. There's other states out there that don't have caseload caps. So when I give this example of like I talk to people in states that have caseload caps and they say it's not possible. It is unethical. And I'm like this is all we know. There is no caseload cap. This is a normal way and this is how we cope with that we have large groups. We have 30 minutes just back to back to back and that's how we do it. So again, those systems in place, if our administrators above us aren't trauma informed, if the people above them aren't trauma informed, we cannot be 100% trauma informed.
Yeah. I mean, I think that speaks volumes is that there's someone like you who's going around to schools, many schools. You said 35 schools that you have?
45 now.
35.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Minus the 20 over there. But basically 45 schools. So someone like you is going around and is trying to make everybody aware as much as possible. The educators, right? The
Yes.
SLPs, anybody who's working with the children in any school, elementary, middle school, high school, you're trying to make them more trauma informed. That's your goal.
Hmm.
However, you're not somebody who can change the system in a way that can change those things that you're describing, such as caseload
Exactly.
management and managing the caseload. Do you think that there are other constraints that make it us inflexible on certain things within the systems that we're part of and lead us to be less trauma informed that you can think of, that you feel like when you go to schools you see that, hey, they're trying really hard to pay attention to the child and see if there's a layer of trauma there that they're missing, but there's a constraint there because the system is making them do something in a very specific way.
Right. Well, so if I look at a self contained classroom and they have a lot of students and possibly a lot of adults in that room, or there's an ABA person who is following around one student, I observed a session yesterday from one of my SLPs. And I was hoping that the kid would be able to like get up and be flexible and just like walk around their space while they're doing the lesson. But yet the ABA person is also there saying, all right, back in the seat. Every time he got up was pushing the chair in. And I'm like, you have to go somewhere else. Like we need
Right.
to work here. And the way that we are working on it is a bit different. So we just need our space. I think that's really hard. Sometimes the goals don't mesh between providers. Or probably the biggest thing that I see is a lot of people are just like, this is how I am working. This is how I am able to cope with it. This is what I've always done. This is what I've learned. And this is how I'm going to keep doing things. I think also the word trauma for people is a really hard word to believe in, I guess. Or like when I say trauma informed, they go, oh, I'm not causing trauma to this kid. And it's like, never said that. We're
Yeah.
trying to we're trying to make you aware that maybe there are things that are going on in this kid's life or have happened. Again, being from Florida, I have had a lot of students on my caseload over the years who have been in near drowning incidents. Yes, lots. And that is unfortunately very common here. So when I am working with those students and I get the IEP or whatever documentation and I see that near drowning incident, I take away any water related play preventatively in my room. So whether that's like the water beads, or we were going to be working on a book today about bath time or swimming in the ocean or something. I don't know how that near drowning incident occurred, but also maybe I'll just like remove anything related to water. I don't know if they are traumatized. I don't know if the parent who is going to be sitting next to me in the private practice is traumatized by that event and doesn't want to do anything with water. Maybe the parent tells me bath time is their favorite time of day. Like, go ahead with that. Then I can reintroduce it. But preventatively, if I know that information ahead of time, that is a trauma informed way to go about it, of removing something that I know could possibly cause harm. That is like the best example that I could give you of knowing a trauma and removing something that might potentially cause harm or re-traumatization.
Yeah, I mean, that's so well said. And just everything you just said, just even from the beginning of how a lot of times, even when we try to collaborate with others on goals, we have different perspectives on it or different lenses, and there is room for all of us. There's space for all of us, but at the same time, it could be conflicting if we're working on it at the same time. Like the ABA therapist is saying, go back, and then we
Hmm.
don't work like that. We work in a much more flexible way. But it's no insult to anybody else. But then everybody's kind of crowded around in a different way, in a different lens, and it's so helpful to have all the different lenses. But are we truly collaborating if we're doing it at the same time but sending opposite messages, right?
Right.
That can also
Right.
be a source of confusion for the child and
Hmm.
maybe could send them spiraling. And then you touched upon how just taking away the things that can cause trauma. So really, I think that's a big part of it, because I think that a lot of times we're so busy that sometimes you don't even see the alerts. There are alerts on everybody's profile as to what they've been through. And sometimes there's so many people, and I'm sure I've been guilty of this too, because like you said, we all make mistakes, that we haven't seen those alerts. We haven't read through the alerts carefully enough to know that, oh
Hmm.
no, this individual actually doesn't have is going through a custody battle, for example. Like that's like a primary one that I've overlooked occasionally here and there,
Yes.
where only one parent can see them right now, and there's a those red alerts that we get. And so
Hmm.
being sensitive even just around the holiday times. Like I found the holidays just passed, and I found like it's brought up, it's an exciting time, and even for myself it could conjure up a lot of sad feelings for a variety of different reasons. And I just feel like even being sensitive around those times, like you can't remove the holidays, but like being sensitive, like this may be a hard time for you. Like how do you work around that? Like for example, because you said that you want to remove it, but sometimes it's hard to like 100% remove it.
Right. I mean, I think it trauma informed care is also just as much about the repair. So let's say that you find down the road that one of the students that had been overlooked of going through this custody battle, or maybe a parent has split for some reason, and you see that, you notice it, but then sometime in the week you realize that you have a book you're about to read that's about mom and dad or something like that.
Yes.
Maybe for that specific student, I would adjust that. Once we know certain things, we can say, what am I presenting? What's in my sessions that might be a little bit difficult for this student? At a larger scale within my school, we had adjustments with some of the reading material that had to do with like violence in any way, that they were state approved. They are for like AP exams. Instead of reading those chapters and possibly causing additional harm, the teachers would kind of tell them, like, here's what happens in this chapter. This is like they basically spoil it for them of this is what happens in that chapter. So they have the choice to go back and read that or skip by it. They don't have to go read that. It's that is a way of, when you know the trauma, we can help, we can collaborate with them, we can give a little bit more of accommodations, but that repair is just as important. You're going to have a lot of students that slip through the cracks of, oh, I didn't know that was going on. Oh my gosh, I said that earlier. You mentioned at the very beginning language changes, and there's very easy language changes that we can do off the bat. Removing toxic positivity, which is what you mentioned in the beginning of like those phrases. So, like, everything's going to be fine. Everything doesn't
None of us
always,
know.
it's not always
Right.
fine.
We don't have a crystal ball. I wish we did, but we don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, right. So the best way to help people cope instead of those toxic positivity phrases is validating emotions. So instead of the kid tells you everything that they're going through, instead of saying, don't worry about it, I went through the same thing and my kids are fine.
Yes.
You could say, you can say, that sounds really tough. Thank you for sharing with me. Or
Mhm.
that sounds like you had a hard time. Sounds like you had a hard day. Like just validating the emotions, that is a great way to build trust with them instead of saying, we're moving on. No, thank you. Like it's a trust building, it's a safety building choice. Adding inclusive language. So it actually just made me think of I have changed all my letters home. Instead of saying dear parents, I say dear adults
Mm.
because I do have a large group of homeless children in the area. They are at um, foster homes, or they live with a grandparent, they live with a cousin. The likelihood that they are with a parent isn't as high as they are with an adult. If they are not with an adult, that needs to be investigated. That's a problem. But they may not be with parents. So when we're just
Right.
defaulting, oh, go tell mom and dad, go tell your parents, I'm not saying that that causes trauma by us saying that, but when it happens every single class period over the years, or it's just causing them stress, it's causing them to be distracted from the material we're trying to teach them. We're not going to meet those goals as fast. So just a simple switch, I'd say, tell your adults. That's it. They can figure out who those adults are. Acknowledging the client is with us might be traumatic. We have students who are using AAC devices because of something that happened to them. They might be paralyzed because of something that happened to them. We have to acknowledge that that can be stressful. And also, some of these IEP meetings that are incredibly hostile with a parent that does not know me. I remember my first year being so like upset, like, how dare they? They don't know me. Like, what did I do to them? And it wasn't that I did anything to
Right.
them, but I understand from the 12 years of them in the public school system feeling like they had to fight for everything, or maybe a kid
Yeah.
was slip through the cracks. I understand why they are fighting. It's not the appropriate way to go about it. But when I foster a relationship with those parents better, I can better say, you're not going to speak to me like that. Like, we're going to try again. So,
It's so true.
all of these language changes are absolutely, absolutely. And then the easiest one that I want you all to also know is removing violent language. There's so many things that we say on a daily basis that we don't know are violent phrases. You're going to start after listening to this, you're going to go, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it. I hear every single day, shoot me a text, shoot me an email. And I'm not saying that hearing that word makes
Yes.
anyone like shudder in fear or like anything like that. But what it does is I don't know what kids are in my classroom that might have experienced domestic violence. I don't know what their history is with violence at home or at school or anywhere. And all that does is take them out of their learning brain and they're kind of in survival brain, or at the very least distracted. So I'm much more direct with what I say. Try to be as direct as possible. So you're going to start hearing like, take a stab at it, roll with the
Um,
punches, like execute a plan, blown away, anything that's like related to violence like that. You're going to start hearing things and going, oh my gosh, I didn't realize we say so many like violent things.
that's so crazy because now I'm thinking about it, and now I'm thinking about my last 15 years and how many times I've said things like that. Execute a plan, right? We're going to execute the plan.
Mhm,
We're
mhm,
going
mhm.
to, like you said, shoot an email, and we're saying this in front of children, right? Even the shoot the email, shoot the text, right? We're saying that in front of children, but even with the children, I say execute the plan a lot, or you were
Right.
blown away. Like these are wow. I mean, I can't
Well,
go back
even
in
I
time,
mean,
but no, but this is amazing. This is good
but
to
then
know.
yeah, but we also have, I mean, skin a cat, like, that is something that I hear sometimes. I don't know if it's a Southern thing that, like, there's multiple ways to skin a cat. I'm like, that is disgusting. Like, we shouldn't be using that. Or kill
Oh
two
no,
birds
I
with
don't.
one stone. I feel like
Oh, that one.
that's more common,
That's
you
used
know?
more common. Yeah, yeah.
But that's used a lot. But, like, we have, especially our neurodivergent population is highly empathic and they feel things. And especially with animals and everything and just like killing and violence, we are distracting them at the end of the day, and I don't know what they've gone through at home. So as a general rule, I remove those things, remove those phrases, and I'm just more direct. It's easier, it's better, and it's trying to reduce the harm I'm causing. So those are easy steps of altering language that you can do today, tomorrow, to work with your students, and it's something that they're not going to notice that you're changing.
Yeah, I mean, and like you made such a good point about using this figurative language. It's not like a lot of them are understanding it, or if they do understand it, right, they don't need to be using figurative language. Like you said, be direct. Because I mean, the more direct you are with
Mhm.
someone also, that could impact your trust, your communication with them, less
Mhm.
communication breakdowns, more safety because they actually understand fully what you're saying and what you actually mean by it. So you just say exactly what
Mhm.
you mean instead of using these. Naturally, we use figurative language just because it's part of our daily like routine with dealing with people. I guess we have to start removing all of that because it could cause, again, re-traumatizing, people not understanding, and then not feeling safe as a result.
Right, and mostly just, like, distraction. Like, again, I'm not saying that any of these phrases put people in a PTSD response, or students in a PTSD response, but what it does is it's just something like, "Oh, that was a little distracting," and the only reason that I even realized these phrases was at my school. I worked there for 4 years after the, incident happened. We automatically removed this, no one taught this to us. We removed violent phrases from our vocabulary. One of the we had a TV teacher who taught, like, TV production. He used to say, like, "Go shoot a scene outside," or whatever, and it's like he reverted 50 years, and he's like, "Go
Wow.
film." Like, he didn't talk to anyone about that, but at the end of the day, he's like, "I know what trauma we've experienced," and it's hard for him to say as well, but that was something easy that we're like, "Why not just make this change?" It's an easy thing that we can do.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the school you were in and where you experienced the traumatic incident was learning together. You guys were learning together as you were going along because, like you said, you didn't have those preventative measures in place, which is what you're trying to explain now, which is prevent it, prevent it because, again, you don't know when a trauma can happen, but prevent instead of reacting afterwards and then trying to kind of redo the whole thing. But it sounds like a lot of things were learned after the incident and then all of you were like working together, it sounds like, to figure out the best approaches into how to navigate this together.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was just naturally, like, we figured things out on our own, what our kids responded to well, and then just talking about it after the fact of like, "Oh, well, I used to say this, and I used to do this," and there's so many experiences that I could, like, tell you about of, "I didn't realize that," or and I think because I had looked up trauma-informed care, already had it in my mind, and there were things that I was already doing to be trauma-informed, but then I had a word for it, and I could better make it evolve and use it for my students and for myself because trauma-informed care is not only about, like, working with our students, it's also about ourself. It's recognizing the trauma that exists in us, our regulation skills. So, it's not just about the people that we are working with. It also is about our safety as well, our trust.
Yeah, that's important to mention that we also have to feel safe. And what you guys
Mhm.
experienced, the adults felt very unsafe, obviously. And so, how are we
Mhm.
going to be safe? What is being done to keep us safe? Which brings me to my final
Mhm.
question, because you've shared so much more than I even expected or anticipated, but so many stories, so many things that could be put into effect literally right now. If I were to go into a session right now or going to work tomorrow, I'm going to be thinking about things very differently just from this conversation. With everything going on in the world, uh, you had mentioned that things are changing, things are evolving. Trauma informed is a thing now, whereas when we're
Mhm.
both millennials, when back in the day it wasn't a thing. What is trauma informed? What do you mean? I know about trauma, right? But now it's a real thing. So, is there anything that gives you hope? I always like to end on a really light note in terms of
I love that.
how we think about trauma and how this trauma informed movement maybe will get stronger. Are you seeing changes being made in schools on a larger level? Do you find that systems are maybe responding a little bit more to this crisis? I mean, I call it a crisis because I really believe that it is.
It is. No, it is. It's actually a national health crisis. Like, trauma is a national health crisis. Um, and I don't even have time to go into, like, the statistics of it or what happens to your brain and body, but I think what gives me hope is I am seeing within the speech field, like, try to stick to the speech field. It's
Yeah, sure.
growing. Like, even from this'll be 8 years February, so next month. Oh, I think my dog just like sat behind me. 8 years in February since what happened to my school. I've been presenting on this for just over 7 years, and the amount of presentations on trauma-informed care just at, like, ASHA, that's kind of like my gauge is how many people are presenting
That's
on
interesting.
trauma-informed care,
Yeah.
has expanded so much, and the people out there that I've been in connection with of other trauma-informed professionals, it's growing. We are trying to get there. We are very behind. We're probably like 20 years behind other fields about trauma-informed care. So we are getting there
Really?
and we're doing the work. Yes, I think so. And it's funny when I present for New York and everything, they're like, "Yeah, we know this. Thank you." Like it's like
Gosh.
it's new information, but they're like, "Yeah, we know about trauma informed." And was like, "Oh, that makes me so happy. Thank you so much." Because a lot of people, it's their first time hearing about it, and
Oh.
I'm glad to know the more I've been presenting, more and more people know what trauma informed care is. They need a refresher. They need more and they're asking for more. It's the SLPs, it's the schools that are reaching out to me and they're like, we need to know how to be trauma informed here. At the end of the day, the systems in place, I think, are a little bit slower, especially when it's like a business that wants money for certain things, like in the hospital system, when we have productivity standards. That's
Yes.
really difficult. That's a whole other topic I could go off about. But I think what gives me hope is our field is very interested in trauma informed care. It's growing and a lot of people are implementing it. And I think we just have to have that mindset switch. And if you are interested in trauma informed care, the book that I recommend for people to get into it is What Happened to You by Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry. I recommend that book first as an introduction to it. And the audiobook is exceptional. It's produced amazing. That is the first book that I would kind of listen to or read about this topic. So it's not as heavy. There's many other books out there that are like gets into what is happening in the brain or more statistics. What Happened to You is a great introduction, but that's really the gist of trauma informed care. It's changing the phrase of what's wrong with you to what happened to you. That's trauma informed in a nutshell.
Instead of what's wrong with you, what happened to you? Yeah, because it's so quick to we're so quick to judge in terms of what is wrong, right? In general with mental health, what is wrong with this individual? What is not normal? Or with the neurodivergent individuals, what is atypical, right?
Exactly.
But instead, no, what is not what is wrong, but what can we do,
What
right?
happened? What happened? Yeah. Yeah.
What right.
What
So
happened to you?
what
Yeah, but
happened and
yes.
now and as a result, what can we do, right? As a result of
Absolutely, yes.
knowing, yeah, what happened. Wow. Rachel, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I know it took a while to get you on, but it was worth the wait. And I know that you have a very busy 2026, which gives me hope. The fact that you're so busy in 2026 means that there are a lot of people reaching out to you that do want to become trauma informed. And I know that whoever listens to this podcast will come out of it with ready to go, trauma informed ways of working with their individuals. You shared so many stories, so many ways to just kind of instantly just get in the habit of removing language that isn't serving individuals that we're working with, and also really accommodating. On every podcast, we talk about accommodating the students, but really accommodating individuals from this trauma informed lens, giving them the choices, giving them their autonomy back, making sure that we're not reacting to something, but really preventing something. I mean, it's amazing, Rachel, that you're able to after I think it was after your first year, you were already working and trying to fix the systems and helping people
Mhm.
that have gone through similar experiences. And now we're here full circle back. I can't thank you enough for your time and sharing all of this because this is really like honestly, I think this is more important than any speech and language therapy anecdotal.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited that we were able to talk and I loved the conversation. So, thank you again
Yes.
for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Unmasking Social, where we neurodiverse advocates and those who support them explore how real friendship begins when we start showing up as ourselves. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend, leave a review, or follow me for more conversations that provide information on neurodivergent ways of thinking, communicating, and connecting. Until next time, keep staying social.